talking about him.
The story is true.
You should hold back. You should hold back.
End of the civilized world. Is it true? Is it true? Well, take a look. They're building a culture to encourage international terrorism. All the names have been changed.
Hold back. Hold back. Nothing will hold up.
All the names have been changed.
Hold back. Nothing will hold us back.
Welcome back to another episode of All Hell Can't Stop Us. I am Jeff Cliff, which I'm sure all the Facebook viewer is fully aware of that, but for people watching in the future and listening to this in MP3 form, which you can get on Mega, in YouTube form, which you can get on NSA Alphabet YouTube, and possibly BitChute as well, and maybe other places. I'm still trying to get into a possible radio station for this. We'll see if that actually happens. But this is your alternative to Netflix, the IFPI, the MPAA, the RIA, and other big media entities, other than, of course, probably Facebook. I'm still kind of caged here. This is the main center for distributing this. It would be nice to have something other than that. But I have a whole bunch of media for you today to enjoy. Hopefully the speaker or the microphone is picking the audio from my computer up, because there is going to be a lot of stuff to kind of go through. And if I can remember to keep the background music going, that would be great too. But as usual, this is since the last show, I've kind of decided that anytime the people I invite don't show up, I'm going to continue to have two sets of music, free music that you can share and remix and stuff like that, instead of just one. In this particular show, I've got the second one is, I think it's actually the first one, is actually a couple of songs all put together, because each individual one of these songs is so short. And so normally I'd probably just pick one of them, but because they're just like, 90-second or 40-second songs, I just took a couple of them together that they kind of seem to flow together a little bit, at least when I was listening to them. So hopefully you enjoy. But before that, I want to play a little clip that I discovered while listening to Democracy Now!'s 2005. I don't know what day in 2005. You could probably narrow it down pretty close based on the content of one of the other clips I'm going to play later in the show. But this is an interesting one, and I'm just going to play the clip, and then I'll talk a little bit about it. So hopefully this is going to go through. Here we go.
And for those of you who may not know, Michael Rose is the leader of Black Uhuru, and he was detained, not allowed to come into the country after setting up a major concert, swing starting in Vermont and going for about a month, where he was going to perform, as he usually did, to the public and to sell out crowds. And the United States, as a result of the Homeland Security, has stopped him from coming in, stopped him from performing, and with the full knowledge that it's a case of mistaken identity, yet they've still stopped him from working. And we're giving, in fact, Lister Hewen. What's that last one? Low?
Well, actually, the Michael Rose case gets worse than that, because the point is that he was actually arrested and he was on the terrorist list and all of that sort of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and still is on the terrorist list. And they've put the word out that we should pull the show, don't do the show, But the bullet has already left the gun. And this is bigger than Michael Rose, too, because this has happened to thousands of families, under this Patriot Act situation here. And it's sad that apart from Vinnet Price's article in the Amsterdam News, the only press that this high-profile reggae icon has gotten. And that's why Sister Carol will be on stage. Where again, Sister Carol, are you going to be on stage?
At Club SOBs.
All
at
right.
204 Varick Street, tomorrow night in Manhattan.
Great, great.
There's a big lineup. It's not just Sister Carol. There's a whole bunch of folks who are going to be there.
Yeah, Carlton Coffey, who also got a Grammy for Bad Boys. I guess it's America's first reality show, which is Oxymoron Cops. Anyhow, Sister Carol from Jonathan Demme is married to the mob. Errol Moore, who is from Monyaka, Godayaka, the big hit that he had. Seriously, he will be on stage debuting as Errol Moore with I Ain't Got No Uncle Sam, Bernard White's favorite tune. And Highland likely with Goodbye King Nuclear. And we're going to introduce Outer National, which is a great group substituting for Junior Jazz who's stuck in Japan.
So all that's happening tomorrow. So we do expect to see your face in the place with these stars who've come out to do a benefit for Michael Rose as well as for WBAI Radio.
What time is this now? 7 p.m. the doors open.
7 p.m.
Everybody got to start calling SOBs. I don't know if they're lying to me or it's a news blackout, but they say nobody has called the SOBs. And we got
Give them a call.
and we got to sell more than 10 tickets. Come on, we need like 300.
So that what was going on there is that Michael Rose character being blocked from entering the United States under false pretenses due to terrorism, quote unquote, or reasons of accused terrorism that were prima facie false. But there's an extra layer of interesting there. I mean, that on itself, it's 14 years ago. It's not that interesting to the political context of the day. But I want to start to build something to talk about what is going on today. And the first thing I wanted to bring up is they mentioned the thousands of people who were arrested in the wake of September 11th in the Muslim community in New York and in the United States generally under basically no charge. They were just swept up in the panic and paranoia of the time. And for a little while, it wasn't really clear what was happening to them. And so remember that there was a lot of fear, there was a lot of talk of war, and there was a lot of rhetoric of dehumanizing these people and trying to verify who was and wasn't a citizen and using immigration as an excuse to kind of sweep them up. But there were thousands and thousands of people arrested at the time for basically no reason and in prison for that. And so that's kind of like the lead in for some of the other things I kind of want to get into today. But it's interesting to remember that this sort of thing has been going on for at least as long as we've been in this anti-terror scare. And it's not just the thousands and thousands, of course, but even high-profile people like this Michael Rose character. If you go and Google him and look, I just looked him up and tried to find some reference to this having happened, and I couldn't find anything at the time. So this seemed to be like a minor incident in an otherwise successful career for a fairly big musician, like a Grammy award-winning musician. This guy is not small. He's not maybe a household name everywhere, but this guy had a decent following. And so if he could get swept up, there were probably a lot of people like him who were also swept up that we'd never even hear of, even in alternative media like WBAI, which was mentioned in that clip, the radio station where you can still to this day listen to a lot of voices from around the world. And so that is kind of the beginning of where I wanted to go. But as promised, I do have 2 musical clips. So now that I've kind of set the stage for thinking about music in terms of the musicians being kind of accused of terrorism for what they say in their art, for what they do in their music, for the political content of their ideas. So let's switch right into DJ Trip. And I think somebody from Public Enemy is part of this one. So let's go. I think it might be Chuck D, something like that. Anyway, continuing on.
no. Only got 2 letters, no singing voices, no. Only got 2 letters, no singing voices, no. Only got 2 letters, no singing voices, no, no, no. Only got 2 letters, no singing voices, 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 no.
And that last little bit was actually the philosopher Nietzsche. He, in addition to being a philosopher, was also a musician. And I think we would probably have known about him as the musician rather than a philosopher if there weren't much better musicians around at the time, which I think even he would fully admit. People like Wagner and there were a couple other kind of big name German composers around at the same time as he, who he kind of looked up to as the kind of ideal that his culture was capable of compared to him. And I would tend to agree with his assessment. I think it was an accurate one. But at the same time, some of his songs are quite moving and beautiful to listen to, like the three that we just heard, I think. So that one, I'm again not 100% sure if I'm going to get content ID slapped for that one. That one it is in my directory as a public domain song. Of course, the music itself is in the public domain, but we'll see if the lack of metadata on that kind of burns this particular podcast later on. But I wanted to get into some actual things going on in the world. But before I wanted to do that, two quick things. First thing is I am moving. And as mentioned in one of the previous shows, I'm currently in a place where, the roof's over my head and things are all good, but I have my own place. The lease is signed and I'm going to be moving in tomorrow. So things are very exciting and moving around in my personal life. And I also wanted to mention a friend of mine has been doing this podcast for a good couple of weeks now. I think they're on episode 80, and I haven't heard it yet. I have been meaning to download it, but it takes a torrent client, a working torrent client, which I currently do not really have set up properly, at least for things that are not like critical emergencies, which in this case, this one probably isn't. But it's called occultae veritatis, if I'm pronouncing that right. And I'm going to give a link where this video is posted on YouTube, as kind of usual for links that I talk about. But he covers all kinds of interesting things, and I've kind of got the list here. Okay, so like he's got one on Project MK Ultra. He's got a show on bioethics. He's got a show on the Chernobyl nuclear reactor. This is, of course, a little bit before the Netflix series, I think, started, so he's kind of ahead of the game on that one. And the most recent one he was kind of describing to me was this scam artist who got caught. And just the details that he finds for some of these podcasts are really interesting. Each podcast is like one topic on one particular thing, and it kind of goes into a little bit of a deep dive apparently into them. But again, I haven't heard it myself. What I would love is for somebody to take this upon themselves as their mission. If you are listening to this right now and you are bored and you don't know what to be doing with your life right now, go download all of them and listen to them, and then get back to me and tell me which ones are the good ones, because that's what I want to hear. Maybe they're all good. Who knows? It's entirely possible. But yeah, someone go do this and then tell me so that I can only have one person maybe doing this. If everyone wants to go listen to it, that's cool too. But I really would like one bored person to just queue up all of these things in their MP3 player and just go for it. I would do it, but my MP3 player is pretty full right now, and I'm going to be downloading it from him anyway pretty soon, and it's going to enter into my mix personally. But yeah, go, someone out there, go do this. But that's kind of like the two brief things I wanted to kind of touch on before kind of going into the main topic of this show, which I had this article that was really good from Vox.com about the ICE camps and the FEMA camps in the United States that the attempted immigrants and the refugees coming from Central America are going into the States, and what to call them and how to think about those particular camps. Unfortunately, right before the show, it turns out that Vox blocks Tor, and so I can't read it to you. Thanks, Vox. That is super helpful to not be able to have the best argument at hand for calling a spade, a duck, and a concentration camp a fucking concentration camp. So that's kind of what I wanted to get into today, because this is really the time and the day where we can actually have the chance. Maybe 10, 20 years ago, the question sometimes came up of, well, what would we do if we were in the position of the Germans in circa maybe 1933 or 1935, before the final solution was implemented, what could we do to stop the horrors of what would happen, given what we know about the society we live in, and given the restrictions of what we can do and the need for heroism, etc. What would you do, right? That was an open question. Well, I think we can start to know what we would do because we have the concentration camps that are open and filled with people. And it's worth calling them concentration camps because that's what they are. Guarded camps with people, thousands and thousands of people thrown in them for basically no crime. In many cases, families separated from each other, people separated by genders, people separated from their children, which, by the way, this is a classic thing that happens before genocide. If you go to the 7 steps of genocide and you look into some of the previous attempts at genocide that have been successfully carried out, things like, for example, what happened at Almaty, where again, the families are split apart, the men are split apart from the women, the men are executed, the women are raped. This happens over and over and over and over again. And so this is starting to be what we're seeing in the southern US right now. And there's been a couple of little things that have been adding up to this. One of the things is the militarization of the border. Trump campaigned on taking the military, a lot of their force in the U.S. out of the Middle East and putting into defending the border. And to a large extent, they have been given a little bit of leeway in terms of what they're able to do to prevent people from coming in, and when people come in, arresting them, throwing into these camps. And so that on its own isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I wanted to play a clip to kind of contextualize that happening and to make that make a little bit more sense and make it more clear why it's not just that the military is in control of the area and kind of people's lives in this way. So let's just have this second clip come up and see if I can get it going. This is from, again, that Democracy Now! From somewhere in 2005. You can figure out when.
To quote, set physical and mental conditions for favorable interrogation of witnesses. Appearing on 3 Sunday talk shows yesterday, the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Richard Myers, said, quote, torture is not one of the methods that we're allowed to use and that we use. I mean, it's just not permitted by international law, and we don't use it. Myers gave conflicting answers when asked if the problems at Abu Ghraib were systematic throughout detention centers in Iraq. First, he insisted the instances of mistreatment were not widespread and were the actions of, quote, just a handful of soldiers. But when pressed, he acknowledged that he had not yet read Taguba's report and left open the possibility the abuses would be broader. Myers also acknowledged he asked the CBS News program 60 Minutes, to delay broadcasting photographs of the abuses, saying it would be particularly inflammatory at the time. CBS, which was originally scheduled to air the images on April 14th, complied and delayed the broadcast by 2 weeks. Taguba's report has led to a military investigation of the 372nd Military Police Company, which staffed the cell block. 17 soldiers in the company have been suspended, and 6 now face court-martial. The woman in charge of Abu Ghraib, Brigadier General Janice Karpinski, has been relieved of her command. We turn now to Seymour Hersh, Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter with the New Yorker magazine. Welcome to Democracy Now!
Hi.
It's good to have you with us. Well, there's a lot to talk about here. First, talk about this explosive report you've published in the New Yorker.
Well, the report by Taguba, first of all, it's probably the best report. I've been doing this stuff for a long time. It's probably the most concise, direct report I've ever read. This guy is really full of integrity, which is good. The terrible truth is that, according to his report, since last summer, the Army's had a lot of reason to worry about its prison system, and actually since Afghanistan. Last summer, the High Command in Iraq, headed by Lieutenant General Ricardo Sanchez, authorized 2 studies last summer into the whole question of how to use the prison system and interrogations. The second of which was done by a former Provost Marshal of the Provost Marshal of the United States Army, the Chief Law Enforcement Officer, a Major General named Donald Ryder. And Taguba sort of tore into that report and said that, Ryder concluded that although there were a lot of problems and administrative problems and people weren't being processed correctly and the system had broken down, there was no real torture. and Taguba said, boy, he missed it. And so the problem isn't so much what the kids showed or what the generals say, General Myers and others. The problem is this report. And it's just a devastating report, and you described it totally accurately. It's as sharp as you depicted it. So the Army's got to deal with this report.
We're talking to Seymour Hersh of the New Yorker magazine. You say General Karpinski wanted to be a soldier since she was 5 as a business consultant in civilian life and was enthusiastic about her new job. In an interview last December with the St. Petersburg Times, she said that for many of the Iraqi inmates at Abu Ghraib, living conditions now are better in prison than at home. At one point, we were concerned they wouldn't want to leave, she said.
Yes. She did say that, and I did begin the piece with that quote because obviously, it's not just a question of dripping with irony. It's a question of sort of the whole sort of filter through which a lot of people want us to see the war. That's sort of as a microcosm of a perception. Did she believe it? I have to take her at her word that she said what she believed. She's now saying that she didn't know what was going on, that the abuses that had become public, she had known about. She's disgusted by it, and she's disgusted at the 6 or 7 people. But the Taguba report really is scathing about the way she ran her. She was in charge, Janice Karpinski, as a brigadier general, reservist. But she'd been in the Army for a long time, served with Special Forces, and served during the Gulf War. He described it in the most as simply probably the worst headquarters he'd ever seen. She was in charge of the 3 major prisons. And when we use the word prison, we have to remember what we're talking about. The people in these prisons are civilians. What happened, and even in the Taguba report, he makes the point that more than 60% of those people had nothing to do with the lack of security in Iraq. It was simply people trying to mind their business, run their lives. There was a separate wing for women and children. There was no process for filtering out those who were innocent from those who were potentially insurgents or potentially Al-Qaeda or troublemakers or criminals. There simply was, every process they had broke down. Under the Geneva Convention, if these people, non-combatant detainees, must be processed. They must give it within months. They have to be given a procedure so that you can make a determination whether they should be kept. And there was none of this was going on. So there's nothing wonderful about the way she ran her operation, but it's also true, as she's been saying publicly for the last few days, that she really didn't have control over the interrogation process. What happened is the military system there, I guess the fair thing to say is that we had turned every prison in Iraq into Guantanamos. The whole function of the prison system was to get interrogations going, to break down people, to get interrogations going so we can extract information, this sort of confounding and befuddling opposition we have and continue to have in Iraq that we simply don't know who, what, where. And we are trying to get more information about them. It's all sort of, besides being, it's sad, actually, to put it mildly.
So again, that was Democracy Now! From 2005 interviewing Seymour Hersh. But there's a couple interesting things I want to poke out of this. The first thing is that the officials at the time first tried to make the claim that there was no torture, that torture was illegal, and that it wouldn't be something that would ever happen at a U.S. prison. And then when they were caught with their pants down that it was happening, they immediately tried to pass the buck a little bit on that to say, okay, well, maybe there was torture happening, but it was just a couple of soldiers at one particular prison. And then it turned out that the couple of soldiers had been working together with the private contractors, the military intelligence, and their brass, and that they were under direct orders to do what they were doing. And so it wasn't just a couple of soldiers. It went right up to the brigadier general in question. Now, that story goes on a little bit more, and we can get into it maybe later. We are slowly running out of time, but I wanted to point out that at every single point, the U.S. military establishment and the government in the United States tried to pass the buck and to say, okay, to minimize what was happening, to say, no, it's not torture. Okay, well, it's torture, but it's only happening on a small scale. And oh, well, maybe it's happening on a couple of prisons, but it's not systematic. At the time of that recording, they still hadn't really shown conclusively that it was systematic, even though it was. And so as time went on, two things were happening. One thing that was happening was it was becoming more and more clear that these kinds of abuses were widespread. The second thing that was happening is, quote, that they turned every prison into Guantanamo, at least in Iraq. This did not stay in Iraq. We know from later events that this was taken home from Iraq. It wasn't just left there. It was part of the war on terror and expanded deeper and deeper into society in the United States, to the point where there were prisons, regular prisons set up with basically black sites in them that kept prisoners away from the Red Cross, as happened in Chicago, where prisoners were just being tortured, and where rape camps were set up, and where there were all kinds of human rights abuses happening in the US prison system that you wouldn't really hear about or know about unless you were intimately connected with some, or had some reason to be paying attention to what was going on in US prisons. And so it's always been pretty bad there, but this just cavalier attitude towards torture and just outright abuse of people, including sexual abuse and rape, is something that a blind eye was turned in Iraq. And yes, there were some lower level people punished, but the higher level people were promoted for it. And I don't have the name off the top of my head, but one of them was promoted, I think, to the head of the CIA right now. So this is to the highest parts of power in the United States right now. And in particular, it was also applied in the Standing Rock case, where there were people put in small cages and tortured in the more I guess, recent protests in the northern US. And so this is something that, as time goes on, the level of inhumanity is expanding. And when we start thinking about that in terms of the concentration camps that are open, one of the things that people say on the conservative side, and I can't believe people are defending it, but there are still some people saying, okay, well, they're concentration camps, or maybe we can call them whatever we want to call them, but they're functionally different. There are differences, and this is important to know. One difference is, allegedly, that people in these camps can choose to leave and go back to their country of origin. Another difference is there are attempts at making people comfortable. For example, there are places to entertain children. It is not the kind of bare minimum of what the US government could be giving the people who are locked in these cages, basically. But it is pretty close. Allegedly, they're not giving a lot of people things like toilet paper, soap, toothpaste, and blankets. And so the people are exposed to all kinds of disgusting living arrangements because of that. That starts to make it sound a lot more like the concentration camps that the British and I think the Portuguese use them, and what are some of the other countries in the colonial Europe that use them, and then of course the Germans, who are most famous for using them. But there are still some small differences. But given those differences, we also know that the US has this problem with acknowledging their torture and dealing with their prison system when it gets to the point where too many people are being brought into it, and too many people are, and especially when the military and intelligence gets involved, where there's a lack of accountability that has been happening consistently. And when that lack of accountability comes up, and when human rights abuses come up, then the media has been failing consistently. I think that clip may have mentioned that 60 Minutes postponed covering of this event. I can't remember if there was an election in between the event, they're finding out about the event, and then it being covered. There very well may have been. That may have prevented Bush from being elected a second time. Again, I can't remember the exact timeline on that, but the media has, the Fourth Estate has failed miserably on this one. Yes, Seymour Hersh got the data out, and there was some public discussion about it, but by and large, this was not a success story for the organized media, nor the independent media. It was a failure all around on the institutions themselves, the people involved. There wasn't enough people standing up on the inside to stop it. So it continued to happen and continued to spread, not just within the military, but within civil society as well. And it just got bigger and bigger and bigger. And now we are at the point where if this spreads to the concentration camps, there's a really large potential for a human tragedy on a huge level, on an enormous level, on an equivalent level to the worst atrocities of the 20th century. This is something that is possible. Is it happening right now? Maybe not.
but there have been at least some instances of the children in these camps being sexually abused like at an organized level. So not like one kid being raped by one person. No. This is like serial rapists being in these camps, working in these camps. This is the level we're currently at. Is it going to get bigger than that? That is what we can choose, and especially what the Americans can choose as a society, of how they're going to deal with this influx of people from climate change in Central America and South America. And so we know that we can't count on the media to inform us if these sorts of things start happening, because they failed in the past. We know that we can't count on the executive for sure. Donald Trump is not going to be candid about when these sorts of things go wrong. We know that we can't count on the prison officials. We can't count on the military, because they've been failing on this in the case of Abu Ghraib. We can't count on the CIA or any private intelligence, and certainly not ICE. They're willing to do whatever they're ordered by the looks of it. And so all of the pieces are in place for a terrible, terrible atrocity to happen in the southern United States right now. And another thing worth pointing out from that clip is in the case of Abu Ghraib, and this is something where the military had total control of the area and were able to basically arrest whoever they wanted. Even in that case, they had a 60% failure rate where they basically arrested 60% people that they were estimating were totally innocent of anything. So the equivalent here is, you can bet that when ICE is scooping up people from elementary schools and scooping up people in fake courtrooms and fake Walmarts and off the street where they just like snatch and grab you and throw you into these camps, they're going to arrest some innocent people. And I have heard of a couple already, US citizens, thrown into these camps. The stories of this are still just leaking out. But part of the reason that they're probably slow to come out is once you get into the US prison system, it may be difficult to get out. And it may be difficult to even if on paper you're supposedly allowed to return to your country of origin, it may be difficult to actually functionally get to that point with so many people and so many people trying to do anything to get out. Never mind the sex for food scandal, right? Like this is caging people in inhumane conditions with the full expectation that people could be tortured, because it's a US prison system where torture is commonplace. Why wouldn't we expect it, right? So the fear is there, the chance for things to go wrong is there, and we have every reason to expect that even US citizens are going to get snapped up in this. And that in and of itself, I think, is enough to condemn one person in particular for failing to be consistent on this issue. So I want to read an article from InfoWars here from 2009. This isn't by Alex Jones. This is by Kurt Nemo. I don't hear him very much anymore, so who knows? Maybe he's been let go or something. But let's see if I can get through it in the remaining time. Quote, continuing his assigned role as corporate media siren of the apocalypse, Glenn Beck interrupted a discussion on Russia and Iran last night on Fox and Friends to mention a heretofore no-no for national television, the FEMA camps. Now we would call them ICE camps or concentration camps. Quote, continuing on. 2 minutes into the video below, Beck declares he attempted to debunk these camps because he is tired of hearing of them, but was unable to do so. Well, we don't have to debunk them now because they're filled with people and there's a massive outcry, and some of the presidential or possible next presidents of the United States are even holding protests against them at them. So it's no longer a mystery that they exist. It's just what are they going to be used for in the future? Anyway, continuing, and now, of course. We now for several days have done research on them. I can't debunk them. Beck follows with a declaration that the United States may be headed for totalitarianism. The existence of these camps is a well-documented fact. In January 2006, Halliburton subsidiary KBR announced that it had been awarded a $385 million contract for the camps for the Department of Homeland Security. In a press release issued January 24, 2006, KBR said the contract, which is effective immediately, provides for establishing temporary detention and processing facilities to augment existing ICE detention and removal operations. It sounds so medical, doesn't it? It's like, this isn't human beings we're talking about. This is just like some kind of a procedural thing, right? But anyway. Program facilities in the event of an emergency influx of immigrants into the U.S. or to support the rapid development of new programs. The possibility of an influx of illegal aliens, however, is cover for the real purpose of the camps. And this is what I wanted to kind of get at. This is what InfoWars used to talk about. This is what they used to bring up. This is what they used to freak out about. And it wasn't just this one article. They used to go on length about this sort of thing. And they stopped. They've stopped freaking out about these camps. They are now more or less in favor of them because it's, from their point of view, not American citizens and possibly white people who are being thrown into it. It's somebody else. It's the other guy. It's the people they don't care about. And yet they understood at the time, quote, that the real purpose of the camps was to detain American citizens after a declaration of martial law. In 1984, the government created REX-84, an emergency response program involving the implementation of martial law and the arrest and detainment of certain segments of the population. REX-84 was mentioned during the Iran-Contra hearings and was publicly exposed by the Miami Herald on Sunday, July 5th, 1987. Pause. I'm not going to get into the Iran-Contra thing here, but needless to say, there was a lot of the government lying to the people in the United States about what it was doing. And so there was, when you hear about something like that, it's worth questioning a lot of what else they say. So anyway, continuing on. REX-84 dovetailed with Operation Garden Plot, a U.S. Army and National Guard program under control of the U.S. Northern Command to provide federal military support during domestic civil disturbances. See U.S. FEMA camps, global research, blah, blah, blah. So in the event of a catastrophic emergency, all national essential functions, the executive branch, which, by the way, that's Donald Trump now, keep that in mind, of the government and the Department of Homeland Security, including FEMA. And then in October 2006, Congress passed the Military Commissions Act, legislating allowing the government to detain citizens deemed enemy combatants and hold them indefinitely without charge and independently of the judiciary, i.e. in camps like this. The act was upheld by the Fourth U.S. Circuit of Court of Appeals in 2003. So maybe it was overturned since. I'd be interested in knowing. But I think it's actually been made worse. I seem to remember. Citizens who are concerned about the purpose and the potential use of the detainment camps have documented and, when possible, filmed the detainment facilities, writes the Geopolitical Monitor. Current estimate of the number of detainment camps is over 800, located in all regions of the United States, with varying maximum capacities. If one includes the government buildings used for other purposes, the number is far greater. And then they have a video, et cetera, et cetera. But long story short, they were just worried about it in terms of, oh, well, they'll put U.S. citizens in it, right? I mean, that's not the only thing to worry about in terms of these camps. But they at least understood that, and they understood that there was that danger, yet they seem to be not doing this anymore. And InfoWars is really dropping the ball on this, I think. And unless I'm like totally missing something. But I have been going to InfoWars pretty frequently, and I haven't seen them bring this up in quite a while. So come on, guys, get with the program. And so, especially with pro-Republican conservatives, it's getting hard to defend them. There are people who hate them as much as people hated the Nazis. And it's getting harder and harder to draw the line between the two because, again, there are these camps, and they are being used in a way where we have every expectation, given the previous crises concerning the U.S. prison system, what is going to happen on the inside of these things. And yet, they seem to be giving them the benefit of the doubt. And so it's, for the Republicans, conservatives out there, like I'd be interested in knowing how to keep your humanity intact while still, of course, disagreeing with you. But it is definitely getting harder to describe to people who are not you that you are still, in fact, human, and that maybe your life has some value whatsoever. It's not impossible, but it is getting harder. And so anyway, towards that end, I have a couple of clips that I just want to, they're both from Zencast, which Zencast is a Creative Commons Zen Buddhism podcast. It's actually really good. And I've linked it before, and I'm going to link it again. But these two clips are from episode 20. One's a poem, and the other one kind of describes what the poem means. So I'm just going to quickly play them, and then I guess that'll be it for this show. But hopefully we can keep thinking and talking about these camps and possibly do something about them. But I'll play these clips, and that'll be it for today.
This is by Thich Nhat Hanh, and it's called Please Call Me by My True Names. Do not say that I'll depart tomorrow, because even today I still arrive. Look deeply. I arrive in every second, to be a bud on a spring branch, to be a tiny bird whose wings are still fragile, learning to sing in my new nest, to be a caterpillar in the heart of a flower, to be a jewel hiding itself in a stone. I still arrive in order to laugh and to cry, in order to fear and to hope. The rhythm of my heart is the birth and death of all that are alive. I am the mayfly metamorphizing on the surface of the river. I am the bird which, when spring comes, arrives in time to eat the mayfly. I am the frog swimming happily in the clear water of a pond, and I am also the grass snake who, approaching in silence, feeds itself on the frog. I am the child in Uganda, all skin and bones, my legs as thin as bamboo sticks, and I am the arms merchant selling deadly weapons to Uganda. I am the 12-year-old girl, refugee on a small boat, who throws herself into the ocean after being raped by a sea pirate. And I am the pirate, my heart not yet capable of seeing and loving. I am a member of the Politburo, with plenty of power in my hands, and I am the man who has to pay his debt of blood to my people, dying slowly in a forced labor camp. My joy is like spring, so warm it makes flowers bloom. My pain is like a river of tears, so full it fills up the 4 oceans. Please call me by my true names, so I can wake up, and so the door of my heart can be left open, the door of compassion. So what Thich Nhat Hanh was doing is he's not seeing people as different from himself. He's seeing himself in other people. And it's all too easy to set up a dichotomy or a duality or separation between us and them, self and others. And sometimes it takes ridiculous forms. It's that country versus this country. And then but then it's not just everybody in this country is on my team, it's just the people in my political party and them. And then it's not just the people in my political party, it's those people in my political party also belong to my church. But it's not everybody in my Sangha, it's those people who do X. It's not just those people who do X, but it's those people who do X who are my friends versus everybody else. But I'm not really sure of all my friends. It's really me and them. And I'm not really sure about myself. It's all too easy to set up this world of dichotomizing or of separation, them versus me or us. And Thich Nhat Hanh takes a very radically different approach, where he sees self in the other. He sees himself in the other, sees the possibility he could be like that person. So rather than seeing him as better than or purer than, or there's a kind of real feeling of kind of an empathy, or kind of a sense of understanding of the other person.